Hi guys, my name's Elizabeth and let's talk about books. So last year I think I read 56 books. My goal was 52 and I had changed it to 52 when it looked like I was going to actually achieve that. But at the end of the year that ended up being like an hour long book review video, which people did watch and I do appreciate, thanks Mum. But this year I thought I would break it down into more manageable chunks because if you've been here before, you know I like to waffle. And so we're going to do it in lots of 5. So this is the first 5 books that I read in 2022. The first one was Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel. Now this was published in May 2012 and I started this in December last year, finished it in January, so I was counting as read it this year, except I listened to it. I really enjoy the Audible narrated versions by Ben Miles in particular. There's a few versions on Audible and audiobook, but the Ben Miles one in particular, he performs the story rather than just narrates it, and I don't like that for everything, but for this I really love it. Now Bring Up the Bodies is the second in a trilogy by Hilary Mantel about the life, the rise and the fall of Thomas Cromwell, who was like a significant person in the court and government of Henry VIII. So we're talking early modern England here. It is historical fiction. I'm really enjoying it. I'm not an early modernist. My background is medieval history, but I'm really enjoying the characterization of the time. I'm really enjoying the part where Mantel is showing, not telling, that she's done her research thoroughly into early modern England, early modern Europe, and it is a story about Thomas Cromwell told from the point of view of Thomas Cromwell. You're inside his head, and so he's an unreliable narrator about himself and other people, and I'm really enjoying that because this second book in particular, a more malicious side of Cromwell is coming out. He's becoming a bit more greedy for power, for money, for position, and it's seeping out slowly, and I'm really enjoying that because we've got to build up to a pinnacle so that we can have a fall and an execution in book 3. If that's not your vibe, if you're not into character stories, if you're more into plot, this isn't the one for you. If you are into character and you don't mind historical fiction, and you're looking for something to invest some time in, I definitely recommend this one. Did I waffle? Yes. What have I written here in my bullet journal review? I did read some criticism of Mantel before I picked up the second one, about the way that she portrays and characterizes women in the story, and it is fairly negative. Knowing that and being able to see that in the text doesn't detract from the story for me at all. She's trying to paint an understandable portrait of a man we know from history, that's Cromwell, but not much is written in the way of academic biography about Cromwell. So this is, I mean, obviously it's fiction, it's filling in a lot of gaps, but there's also not really much, not many other sources just on Cromwell, which is interesting. I'm sure there is now, but maybe wasn't in 2012. I think Dermot McCulloch has written a book about Cromwell. Cromwell as narrator means a sympathetic portrait of Cromwell, but some maliciousness is slipping out. I gave it 3 Goodreads stars, which means I liked it. The second book I read was The Bright Ages by David M. Perry and Matthew Gabriele. This came out in December 2021 and I picked it up a couple of weeks after, so I was reading it through into January this year. The Bright Ages is a pop medieval history, so it's accessible, it's readable, there are references and footnotes, but it's not excessive. The writing is accessible, which is always awesome in a history book because what's even the point if you're only writing to people who already know and understand what you're talking about. So that's why I picked this one up, and it's because I've been out of medieval history study for about 5 years now. I really miss it. I just really wanted to be back in that era and learning, and so I really enjoyed it in that respect. I did learn some things that I didn't know. it's presented in the way of each chapter is a vignette, a little story of a piece of time, and I think it did a really good job because medieval history is literally the span of 1,000 years across the entirety of Europe, Turkey and the Middle East and the north of the African continent. Basically the parts where Christianity was in Europe and surrounds. There was criticism of this book that I read after reading the book about the lack of people of colour who were prominent in medieval Europe, and they're often left out of European histories, including this one. And I think that is a valid criticism of this book, but also I think trying to cover such a span of time in such a short book is a Sisyphean task. You will never achieve it. In fact, where is it? This is my first year history textbook. It's even shorter. It's 360 pages. Like, you're going to get brief touching the surface and nothing else. So the part where they've gone in depth into a particular story for each chapter is probably the only way you can do it. It's going to pique your interest, it's going to whet your appetite, and you're going to go and learn more about particular people, particular events, particular ideas or theories. That's the point, right? So yes, there could be more. There were black people in medieval Europe, definitely could have been in there, but at the same time, write that book, make that book happen. You know, there's more stories to be told, there's more history to be written. The big thing that I took away from this book was there's a lot of demonstration of historiography, which is how historians do history. Each of these chapters are presented as, this is how historians do history. Here's the evidence, here's how we've put it into a context. This is how using evidence changes over time, and that's why history gets rewritten, or like history will never be finalized because people always have new questions to ask of the old sources. That's how history works. And there's a lot of that in this book, is basically teaching you how historians do history. But here's a quote that I really enjoyed. Historical analogy becomes a simple explanation for what is inevitably a complex phenomenon. And as historians, it's always our job to remind people that anyone who offers that type of simplistic narrative is selling something. It's always the historian's job to say it's more complicated than that, because it is always more complicated than that. So if you're interested in a brief look at some things that happened over the course of 1,000 years, pick this one up for sure. But be aware, obviously, that it can't be everything to everyone. It can't contain all the stories ever. I've written here that I meant to give it 3 stars, which means I liked it, but I fat fingered and gave it 4 stars. So I've left it at 4 stars, which means I really liked it. I really liked the historiography in it. I really liked the explanation of how historians do history, which I've already spent 5 minutes waffling about. I think it's critical to understanding, in the same way explaining how science works for people who aren't scientists and not working in the field. I think it's so important to understand it's the context. It's giving the context of how people do the thing they specialise in. I think it's brilliant. 4 stars. Alright, next was another book I read on Kindle, so please do enjoy the cover here. It was Brandon Sanderson and Janci Patterson, Evershore, which was published at the end of December, and I picked up and read in January this year. Evershore is the 3rd in a series of novellas that were written to tie in with Brandon Sanderson's sci-fi about a young girl who discovers she has the power to save her planet and her people and ultimately the universe, starting with Skyward. Yes, Skyward. And while she's off saving the universe, the people that she's left behind on her planet are also having adventures. So these novellas are just filling in those gaps. And if you haven't read the first 2 novellas or the first 3 novels, this won't make any sense to you. But in this one, our main POV character and their military buddies go off planet to try and save another planet. Hijinks ensue. There's a big battle with spaceships at the end where they're all coming into the powers that they have, but also they're teenagers, so they're just coming into life and relationships and, you know, that sort of thing. Now, by the end of this, I had read a novel and 3 novellas and I was sick of this universe. I gave it 3 Goodreads stars, but I was ready to move on. I'll look forward to the next novel when it comes out, but it was time for a break. Okay, I think we're on number 4. You tell me. And this one was The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nghi. This was a short story that I read on Kindle with my book club. I say my book club, it's a public book club called Sword and Laser. I will link them below. Which was their pick for February 2022. Now this was published in March 2020 and I read it in January this year. I struggled with this one and that's all on me. That's not the book. The book is about, oh my goodness. So this story is framed by a monk or a religious figure. It's not explained in those sorts of terms. Meets a woman who was handmaid to the Empress and is telling the story of what happened to the Empress and relating that history and how it had affected her in particular and telling it to this basically historian monk figure. And I read this, like this was my bedtime reading book when I was tired, and so a lot of it I think just went over my head, and that main monk character uses they them pronouns, and when I was tired that was really difficult to pass, like is it referring to this character or is it referring to a generic they? I really struggle with that at night. There's another book I actually started this year that has the same they them pronoun character, and I could not, because when I was tired I just could not pass that in my head, so I'll have to come back to that one. Anyway, the different pronouns is not how I've been trained to read, and so again that's on me to practice. I've written here, I feel like this book was full of subtlety and it was a slow burn and I missed all of that because I was tired and I was reading just before bed. So if I wanted to get the most out of this one, I'd have to read it again, which I'm not intending to do. So don't take my review for it. I think in the circumstances I read it, it was fine, but it could definitely be more, and there is more. There is at least one sequel to this, so it's definitely more there. It's a story about girls kicking ass and taking names, but like in a subtle, women don't have explicit power, they have that subtle power to shape the world kind of thing. So I do recommend, like this is really waffly because I don't remember it very well and I struggled with it, but my general remembering vibe is that it was good, it was short, it was definitely Asian inspired, so if that's your vibe, definitely check this one out. And I'm sorry that I couldn't be more. The next one was Adrian Tchaikovsky, The Elder Race. Now, Adrian Tchaikovsky wrote a book that I loved. I loved it. It was called Children of Time. And then everything else I've picked up by him has been really, I haven't finished it. It's been a bit, so when I gave this one a go, I was a bit hesitant, but willing to try. And I loved it. I loved it so much. So this is The Elder Race, published in November last year, and I read it in January to February this year on my Kindle, and it was an absolute delight. It's basically taking Arthur C. Clarke's third law, which is, I'm going to quote it here, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, and he's built a novel around it. So it's a basic premise in which we have an elder mage who is basically just a human sociologist who is observing the planet, and so has that indistinguishable from magic technology, but has been approached by a princess to help save her people. It's ultimately a book about communication between the two, because even though he has the technology, she has the need. The way they speak to each other doesn't entirely convey what they mean, and so it's a coming together of that. But also it's about, again, finding your place in the world. It's also about the sacrifices that both the elder and the princess have to make in order to satisfy themselves and their place in the world. I loved it. I loved this story based on this premise. The communication issue was not just the language, it was the technology as well, and what you see and what you expect to see. What have I written here? The way that these two characters interact and communicate is at the heart of this story, even though they team up to fight a demon. Or is it a scientifically explainable demon? No spoilers. I absolutely loved it. 4 Goodreads stars. So that's my first 5 books of 2022. I will be making more of these videos, I hope. So subscribe if you want to see more, or slide into my DMs on Twitter and Instagram and tell me that I have terrible book taste, and I will probably cry. And I will see you next time. Bye.